Greetings and welcome to IRR TV. This is the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Gabriel Krause. I'm standing in for Sihle Ngubesi, Big Daddy Liberty, who is currently doing fabulous things in Germany. So shout out to Sihle. And I'm joined this morning by Sarah Gon.
Hi.
How's it, France?
Hello.
France Grenier and Nicholas Lorimer.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I think we're going to jump in with the news of today, which is really sort of what unfolded over the weekend and trying to process that. France, do you want to kick us off with your reference to what you think our viewers might do well to have a read at?
Yeah, we've often been critical here of the state of the South African media, that it's naive, leans too far to the left, etc. There's one publication which really stands out as a centre of excellence, and that is Rapport newspaper under the editorship of a great chap by the name of Valdemar Pelser, who I think has been very brave in upholding standards and freedom of speech and real debate in his newspaper, and I believe the successes are now there. And that the newspaper is actually doing pretty well because it stopped what it did many years ago, attacking its readers and insulting them, and it started to write for them. And I was prompted to say that this morning by reading his editorial on Sunday, which I'll quote very selectively to you from, translating it, of course, from the original as I go. But this is his opening line. He says, fasten your seatbelts for Cyril Ramaphosa's great leap forwards, inspired by Jesse Duarte. Now with an opening like that, you know that something good is coming. He goes on, I quote a line for you. We're now talking about the ANC's bullet trains, that he writes, the ANC can't even buy trains that fit on the existing railway lines, let alone this, and goes on to say that the dream of the sort of space age transport system, this dream is going to be implemented by none other than the transport minister, who's Fikile Mbalula, who he goes on to describe as a clown. Now Valdemar is a very serious observer of the country, and a chap, I think, with an enormous commitment to the success of our society, which is why he's brave enough to do this. And not just to do what many other editors and journalists do, is to look at what would be popular on Twitter and to write that. And he goes on to write that he deals with that paragraph of, I thought it was one of the saddest paragraphs in Ramaphosa's speech, where he says he just wants to call on the business community and the world to consider South Africa's interests in their investment decisions, which really was pathetic in the right use of the word. And Valdemar sees that, and he writes that he wishes that it could be like that, but the government doesn't appear to understand that investment decisions are based on the environment that you create. And his closing is, there were members of parliament, I believe he was sitting in the gallery watching this occasion, members of parliament laughing out loud at Ramaphosa's speech, and he closes by writing, it was tragic to witness it.
A tragic comedy. Yeah, okay. Let's look at, we spoke about Sona quite extensively on Friday last week, and I think just to recap, I think a really good point that came forward is that Ramaphosa seems to be speaking on two levels. On the one level, you have these pipe dreams, the bullet train, the cities on a shining hill. I heard reports of Eusebius Makai's show on 702 being very disappointing, apparently, to the host, by the sounds of things. A lot of people calling in and laughing about these ideas, not considering them very serious proposals for an immediate way to address the future problems. And on the other hand, you have Ramaphosa saying we want to create basically 200,000 jobs a year for youth, which would be less than we've created on average for the last, since 2001. And so very disappointing in terms of that kind of hard issue, the kind of target that he set. The sort of besides Sona, the key interest, I think, in the ANC and the story around Ramaphosa is to do with his campaign in 2017 in the build-up to Nasrec, And Nicholas, do you want to come in here? And
so over the weekend on the Sunday Times released a report saying that apparently his campaign managed to raise 400 million rand, which is a very healthy amount of dosh. And
for a campaign that's ready to target 5,000 delegates.
That's
rather than a mass national.
Now this is his internal ANC campaign.
Yes. So his the amount of money per voter is ridiculous in that instance. And now there has been a sort of there's an investigation being led by the public protector into his finances, into his campaign, and into how the money was spent. Now she was opposed very strongly by the DA. She's not regarded. She has not had the same track record as Tuli Malonsela, even if she's perhaps a bit overrated. This one is much worse, so this is possible that this investigation is maybe something untoward happened, or maybe it's an internal ANC attack on Ramaphosa.
So I just want to throw some names down on the table. It seems like the four major players here perhaps are Cyril. The horizon is still on the horizon, Ramaphosa. We've got ace number one in the party, Magashule. We've got Busisiwe, irrational non-disclosure, Mkhwebane. And then we've got Gavin. I'm not really what to say about Gavin Watson, who gave the money, who sort of seems to be involved in directing the money from Bosasa to Andile Ramaphosa or to Cyril Ramaphosa or to the campaign. That confusion was sort of what seemed to get the thing going. Do you think this is a genuine... What do you think to make of these four actors? Are they really opposed to each other?
I think yes and no. I think they're actually all looking for the same thing. The only problem is I think Mkhwebane and Ace are much better suited and might in fact be targeting Cyril, because where does this money come from? I mean, suddenly there's 400 million seemingly coming out of nowhere. I mean, I don't say it's not there. It's just that she's so obviously going after him. It suggests an internal fight for Ace to dethrone her. For Ace to dethrone Cyril. We've tended to think that she is very much on the Ace camp, which she appears to be. But this is unsubtle to say the least. And obviously the sheer scale of it is intended, as somebody said, this could be grounds for impeachment.
Well, the Sunday Times story is essentially a money laundering story. And if you read the headline, which is the thing that will form the impression in many people's minds, the suggestion of the Sunday Times that Cyril Ramaphosa has been implicated in a massive act of money laundering sufficient to justify his impeachment. I'm very cautious about this. Anyone involved in ANC politics is always very close to some corrupt element or another. And the fact that operators as sophisticated as the Watsons were able to get R500,000 into his campaign is not to suggest that there's anything untowards with the rest of the campaign itself. The Sunday Times also, we must remember, has a reputation for publishing nonsense front pages. Yeah. They've got it badly wrong on so many stories.
Rogue
unit selling the seabed stories, other things that, there's false news and then there's just complete fabrication. And I think my sense, and I'd be happy to be corrected once the public protector and perhaps a more respectable body has also concluded an investigation. My sense is the Sunday Times is back to its old tricks of pursuing utter sensationalism. And my initial feeling, anyone who read that, I'd say to them, in defense of Mr. Ramaphosa, be very cautious about the inferences being created by that newspaper as it tries to, get people to read it. And it's you compare it to the quality of what's going on in Rapport newspaper, there's actually no comparison.
Okay, so I think that perhaps something that's more substantial, that has more long-lasting impact on the country and that's also more immediate is the portfolio committee appointments. We've had Bongani Bongo say, please don't call us Zuma ministers or Zuma members of parliament because we are not necessarily Zuma ministers. and it is unfair and unjustified to.
We're here for other reasons, not just the Zuma thing.
Yes, it's not just that. So I mean, some of the portfolio committee leaders that stand out: Tina Jumat Peterson, Mosebenzi Zwane, Supra Mahumampelo, Faith Mutambi, and Bongani Bongo himself. These are all people that have pretty strong prima facie cases against them.
I think this is where Hillary Clinton's phrase comes in about a basket of deplorables. But there is one additional one. Unfortunately, I can't remember her name. I think she was a former mayor of one of the Eastern Cape cities. She's been jailed for fraud. Now, I assume that does contravene the ANC's rules, but it's not getting in their way. And so now you've got more deplorables entering the basket. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's literally like taking who are the bad guys by the end of 2017 and putting them nominating them for
slot them
committees.
right back in. So Nicholas, you and I were talking earlier about why it is that the ANC's policy seems to be, if you're not in jail, then you're innocent. Even if you have been to jail, then you're still innocent.
Yes.
Where do you think that kind of bubbles up from? Why does it seem so deeply entrenched?
Because at this point, if the internal politics are overriding, I think, almost every other decision-making process in these appointments. So it doesn't matter whether someone's been to jail, whether someone is not able to perform the job, as long as they are from the right faction and are paying off the right group. It's important to put them in the correct position.
So it suits the current sort of balance of forces.
Yes.
But then is there like a historical precedent for this way of going about things, or is this a new feature of the new dawn South Africa?
Well, I believe it was actually Winnie who was, she had these, she was convicted of corruption charges for a while, and I believe that the rules of parliament actually said that she shouldn't be able to serve, and yet she did. So there's been I think a sort of deterioration in the enforcement of the standard for quite a long.
She didn't really show up very much, but she did qualify as member of parliament.
She drew the salary,
despite the apparent conflict. Between the rules.
Yeah, and Gabriel, if you are well read on criminal syndicates, you'll know that the fatal moment is when the first fish, bigger fish, goes to jail. And I'm afraid that what's happened in the ANC is that it has become so utterly decrepit and so deertrek of corruption that no one dares. It's a Mexican standoff.
Right.
No one dares move. If you move against me, I move against you, and that means someone else moves against your mate, and so it's stuck in complete stasis, waiting for an incredibly strong leader to come along and break the deadlock, or waiting for the thing to slowly sink into the swamp.
At Zuma's recent trial, he actually said that very explicitly. He said, I told them not to kick this the dust up around this because you don't know who's going to get caught in the mess.
Yeah, in that foggy mess.
The only way, I mean, we've been on the deplorables, drain the swamp and lock them up. That's the only way you get out of it.
Okay, so there is a tension there because sometimes it does seem as if the ANC works like this. There is a faction of people that have been leeching off this patronage network, and their power is predicated on the patronage network, and all of that money's filthy, and this is half of the party or 60% of the party or whatever the case may be. And then there's this other faction, the Ramaphosa faction, that is squeaky clean, that is that stands to kick up the dust and walk out of it sort of shiny and glittery, and untouched itself. And I don't know. It's hard. And that even that kind of breakdown of the factionalism seems different to the breakdowns sort of ideologically of people who might be relatively uncorrupt, but nevertheless ideologically fully embedded in the sort of national democratic revolution and pursuing the dreams of the state owning all of the means of production, including the land and the microphones and the dreams that you come up with at night.
Now this is it. This is how it works. I'm busy drafting a report for bankers and the like who who rely on some of our analysis to explain where we are. And I reiterate what we've tried to explain to them through the whole of, since Nasrec, unsuccessfully. It was hard for them to hear it. That this is how the ANC works. In 1991, Mandela went to Davos and made a speech that saw the party change ideological tack because he understood, and Mbeki understood, that if they did not reform and try and grow the economy, at least for a while, they'd surrender control of the whole revolution to the IMF within 5 years. Good fortune and the ideological swing and the gear policy and Mbeki saw South Africa stage somewhat of a recovery for the first 13 years after 1994. Mbeki is overthrown in December of 2007, and that overthrow is driven by two groups. One is a very well-managed fight back by the relative left of the ANC, which had been isolated since Davos, on the one hand, and capitalizing on the ethnic nationalism that was driven out of the Zuma camp that weakened Mbeki on the other hand. And the two camps, the ethnic, now racial nationalist crooks were one lot, and the relative left were another. They had nothing in common with each other. They didn't work together. They loathed each other. They continue to loathe each other to this day. But their interests intersected in December of 2007, and that was enough for Mbeki to be ejected. Thereafter, as Mr. Zuma went on to loot the state, he allowed his sort of odd bedfellows, the relative left, to get back into cabinet and start making policy, which they've done. Those two groups, the collapse in governance and the shocking looting of the Zuma era, together with the sharp left-wing turn in government policy,
cigarette smugglers and socialists,
combined to sink the South African economy and make impossible a recovery with the rest of the world after the financial crisis. The implications of that were that popular confidence in the ANC began to sink, and we tracked many measures of that. And the two sides found themselves in conflict in the years running up to the Nasrec conference, where both sides sought to escape culpability for the crisis. The left, in a sense, almost prevailed by crafting the thesis of state capture to sufficiently discredit Mr. Zuma to bring Mr. Ramaphosa to power, notwithstanding the fact that prominent left-wing advocates in COSATU and the SACP had been central to Mr. Zuma's coming to power in the first place. But they'd changed horses in midstream. Mr. Ramaphosa wins against the crooks, but he is the narrative, but he didn't, because his margin of victory was a couple of hundred votes out of just short of 5,000 delegates. What's happened, what Nasrec, I think, ultimately was, and we write it now, is it was a deadlock. And you see the deadlock in that narrow margin. What has happened now is that much of the infrastructure of the ANC of the Zuma era is still there and exists under the formal leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa, who's obviously not its leader. And as that former Zuma sort of infrastructure starts fighting back, which it's done very effectively, I think it's got the balance of power in the ANC now, and it's got the balance of power in the ANC Parliamentary Caucus, and you see that in the parliamentary chairs. Mr. Ramaphosa has been forced ever more on the back foot and has sought refuge and sanctuary amongst his leftist backers, the Communist Party being a prominent one.
Yes.
And that explains why in the little realm that he has some control of, the cabinet, the executive, the union buildings, he's appointed so many prominent communists to his cabinet. In the middle, there should always have been a third group, and that was the sort of pragmatists that grew out of the Mbeki era, whatever the original motives for the swing between Davos and Gear were. But they've faded off the scene and have disappeared, and the last of them, we try and make it a habit to sort of try and see where they fit into the ruling party. And I'll tell you, they're leaving. They've been leaving for a decade, and they're exiting. And that pragmatic middle in the ANC is gone. So all that's left now are the racial nationalist crooks, Ace Magashule, the ANC itself, and the Parliamentary Caucus, and dogmatic left-wing ideologue sitting in the cabinet, with Mr. Ramaphosa, who doesn't actually fit into either category, trying to hold the whole rotten lot together and making, I think later it will prove to be the fatal mistake of thinking that unity of this lot must now be one of the party and the government's priorities.
I think that's pretty worrying analysis, but it certainly chimes in with the vast kind of, I don't know, the vastly worrying experiences that we've had for the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
I don't know if I'm correct, but as I recall, when Mandela first went to Davos, he met with the Chinese, and he was indicating that he was about, that they were going to move on the socialist towards communist route. And the Chinese said no. And I think this current government has learned nothing from that. And I imagine they see the Chinese as a source of funding. But I'm wondering whether the Chinese might not say no, because you're going in the wrong direction.
Oh, well, yeah, of course, the Communist Party of China might very well consider South Africa to be much too communist to really do business with, and not to have realized that their name is a bit of a...
And imagine what they would probably be thinking is, this country cannot afford... It's got potential, cannot afford to go down that route, because if we throw money into it, it is literally going to go down the drain.
So if Ramaphosa looked like he might have been Deng Xiaoping, I think, to me, in 2017, when he was campaigning against Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma with this 400 million rand or not, I thought that he was here to occasionally, I mean, as people like to say in the Wits politics department, this terrible habit of the ANC to talk left and walk right, as Deng Xiaoping certainly did.
Yeah.
And with the consequence of the greatest upliftment of mass numbers of people out of poverty in history. History.
Human history.
But it seems like really a lot of what the ANC's been doing is to sort of talk both ways and then drift ever further leftwards in terms of the ideological policy, and ever further downwards in terms of race nationalist, corrupt-backed sort of activity. And it seems like Ramaphosa is sort of talking both ways and not doing anything, and the party's sort of drifting according to the logic of its own internal battles.
It does feel like we're at a bit of a crossroads between Venezuela on one hand and South Sudan on the other.
No, but this ends perhaps, and we'll work more on this before we're certain, but there are a lot of indicators now, confidence in measures, protest measures, youth voting trends, that suggest that there is a quick way out of this, which is what happens when the ANC loses the next election in 2024. And I mean, we're working on it. It'll take a long time to be certain what we see, but there's enough for me to think that that outcome now needs to be on anyone, family, a person, a business, investor, diplomats, needs to be on there, justifies being on your strategic radar for South Africa as much as any other outcome that you may consider. They're going to throw it all away, and by being unable to make the hard, pragmatic calls that Mandela and Mbeki, despite what their ideological inclinations might have been, were able to make in the 1990s.
Sorry, can I say, it always struck me one of the great ironies about this sort of inevitable slide is that if the ANC had gone the other way and done all the things that the IMF and the rest of us want them to do, it's the government. It could get kudos for other people succeeding, like the private sector. Mm-hmm. The more it gets out, the more other people do, people will say, we'll praise the government for it. I mean, it's such a, do less and get more praise.
Correct. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work, and that's how it often does work. I think that there's this cynical attitude that, like, if the country had done really well and there was good education and there was more people entering the middle class, then this story that Anthea Jeffrey tells about the ANC kind of squashing black moderates and black competitors to their ideology in 1986 and 1994, that project would not has turned out to be as sustainable as it has. The more dynamic the economy is, and the more dynamic political debate is, the quicker the sort of phoenix rises from the ashes of the People's War, and you see genuine political debates.
Yeah, 100%, Gabriel. I think that's a very important thing to say. That in a country that welcomed true debate, that was able to get past the sort of dogmatically politically correct issues, such as those around race, the implication of that would be that both the crooks and the hard left would be very quickly discredited. And that mainstream public opinion, that if you watch the show, you know what we know about it is moderate, would come to the fore, the phoenix would rise, reform movement would appear, and we don't just bang on about free speech and fighting politically correctness because that's what we do. I think one of the outcomes of it will be that a society that welcomes the free flow of information and ideas will very quickly discredit fundamentally bad ideas, such as those that now dominate the two opposing flanks of South Africa's ruling party.
Yeah. I mean, I think the worst thing about the ANC is that as much as we might speak about the conflict between the Magashule camp and the Ramaphosa camp, or even during this 400 million rand campaign supposedly between NDZ and CR17, there were no direct debates. Never two ANC politicians on the same stage saying, I think this is the direction the country should go in, I think this is the direction the country should go in, I'm going to hold you to your previous statements, to your previous actions, and say, why can't we do better? But we have seen, we're not the first country to see a real stranglehold on the free flow of information and of good ideas. And I'm not sure if that is an appropriate segue, but we were discussing a report on immigration numbers, particularly in regarding to Jewish immigration numbers, sort of the free flow of people getting out, I think, while they see an opportunity to still do so. Sarah, do you want to talk to us about that a bit?
Yeah, there's been some figures released recently about the extent to which the Jewish population of South Africa has diminished. At its height in the 1970s, it was 120,000 odd. And it's now measured at about 50,000. Now, there's probably been quite an immigration rate in the last 5-6 years, because literally 5 years ago it was 60,000. And it's the reason that non-Jews, non-whites, blacks, whites, coloreds, Indians are leaving as well. The sense of absolute insecurity and fear that whatever the government's doing, their children's future is at stake. And I think there's an intensity about it now, even amongst people, even from myself, of a level of hopelessness that I've never seen before. And it's kind of a bit of a pity. Jews can be good for society, once they go.
It's a very worrying thing. Countries that attract Jews and Jewish immigrants, and countries that welcome Jews and create environments that Jews can thrive in, and countries that have sound relationships with Israel are successful countries and societies. And that South Africa is not ticking all those boxes is a little canary in the cage, a warning sign, and it worries. It worries.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just very clear that that Jewish people have in the sort of in the collective conversations that happen around dinner tables and shuls, a very potent historical sense of warning, a sense of caution about being trapped in a boiling frog environment. Well, and I think that is why of all of the diaspora groups, it's a particularly concerning kind of canary. It's quite a sensitive one. Just
to make the other point, added to this sense of insecurity and fear has been relatively huge levels of anti-Semitism expressed in the society, and not sufficiently condemned by anyone in authority or the government.
Right.
And my mother made she made a remark yesterday, and she said, 10 years' time, South Africa will be Judenfrei.
Judenfrei. Oh my God.
And not because it's it's going to be a concentration camp, but the Jews will have gone.
Yeah. Well, what Lamini says, I love Hitler. And he's still sort of relevant.
And he was a socialist.
And acceptable. country's university campuses, some of them.
Whereas
Okay. On a lighter note, South Africa has, I think, had its most catastrophic cricket World Cup campaign. Yesterday, I watched early in the morning. It looked like we had Pakistan in a good position. They'd lost 3 wickets, and then I came back and then I saw that we were hammered. I think that it's a particularly concerning one for us at the Institute, because one of our colleagues, Marius Ruert, had been so excited about our prospects of doing well, and I think with some good reason. If you look at just the team, we have in Kagiso Radaba, one of the most highly rated bowlers in the world. In Hashim Amla, we've had someone who has, when he has been on top form, been one of the most successful batters in the world. Faf is great. There's a lot of talent there, and I think obviously from our point of view as a classically liberal institution and one of the few in the country that really is proudly non-racialist, we noticed comments coming from the team that they are sick of quotas. This lines up with 84% of South Africans that we find, and that they just want to get out there and win. And so it seemed like the perfect setup for something really good, and yet it's all fallen apart. And I think that we can leave it to the sports commentators to sort of look at individual players and individual narratives about why things went wrong. But France, you had something I'd like. I think there's a slightly bigger picture view on why cricket in South Africa.
Well, we welcomed it when Cricket South Africa, ahead of the World Cup, said there wouldn't be quotas. The team would be picked on merit. And I think the team was picked on merit, and that seems to be the view of cricketers who we consult. But then last week, Pat Simcox, who played for South Africa and is a chap who is not has not capitulated to pressures of political correctness, said, I think, a quite important thing, that the institution of cricket has become a bit like Eskom and is afflicted by some of the same problems. And if you look beneath Cricket South Africa's announcement that the national team won't be picked on quotas, at provincial levels of the game, and beneath that there's been an extraordinary push for exactly that. And it's one of the most draconian enforcers of racial edicts has been Cricket South Africa. And I've had the opportunity to talk to a cricketer, and recently, and in fact some others over time, and very carefully the point has been made that that has damaged the provincial game to a point that it has become essentially what the top end of club cricket was 20 years ago. And South Africa's lost a lot of its great talent to other parts of the world. I mean, rugby's suffered to an even more extreme degree from the same thing. And that is what we're starting to see in this team as well, that what's come up through the ranks and the ranks themselves, the jump from provincial to international is simply too big, and we've found out. And in the same way that Eskom has an inquiry into what is going on, and that I think Eskom's inquiry should find, if it's honest, that the overzealous application of racial quotas was a major problem in the organisation. I think the same way that the DA has an inquiry, and I think the inquiry, if it's honest, will find that an overzealous promotion of racial nationalist ideas explained what went wrong in the DA. When the team comes back from England, if there is an inquiry, there probably should be one, maybe that the 3 inquiries can pool their resources and see what lies beneath.
And it is interesting because the problem, I mean, I think part of the problem with the team is it's the lack of depth was exposed. A key player's off form, another key bowler is injured, and all of a sudden you expose the fact that we can't really replace our top 11 with anyone from below that, because
there's something else there, because a bowler like Rabada, who was number one not recently, he
Lethal.
Performed really badly,
and
the only one who I would say performed well was Tahir, because he's mature and he had a plan. If the X didn't work, he'd try Y. The speedsters had no plan, and there you've got to look at management.
Got an in-house cricket commentator, right?
I'm very glad.
I haven't got the stats.
Yeah, and it mustn't, what happens now, we saw it last week with some things we said, is our media takes the conversations just past and says the Institute says that the cricket team was poor because there were too many black players.
No.
That's what the predictable.
Yes.
If you follow what this organisation has actually said about sports and transformation over the past 90 years, what you will find is that it said that you need to create the circumstances where kids have the opportunities to develop into sports stars. I travel a lot around the country. I drive around, go to little towns and talk. And I don't think, and when I drive past the town, I try and look at the schools to get a feeling of what's going on in the place. I've never seen a school in deep rural South Africa that seemed to be a state school, and maybe there's some, but I've seen many, that has anything approaching cricket facilities where kids can actually learn and develop into players. All that Cricket South Africa has done, because it's utterly lazy, is to play the racial nationalist game by saying we'll have some quotas, and we hope that the top elite schools in the country will have enough black pupils that we can fill our quotas. And what happens is that the position of ordinary poor kids vis-a-vis cricket is no different to what it has been for those kids at any point in the history of our country, because no one's ever bothered to actually do real empowerment by getting to grips with grassroots communities and addressing the inequalities, the poverty and the injustice that many kids grow up facing. So if anyone wants to start with us about how this shows how that we've said the problem is that there are too many black players, in fact, it's quite the opposite. There are too few because no one has bothered to create them. Everyone has rather played a little political game of racial nationalist agitation in the hope that they'll get away with that. We'll still make our way through Cricket World Cups, and the consequences are there in the results of the past 2 weeks.
The thing about creating an even playing field is that a cricket pitch literally is an even playing field. Yeah. And it's a hard thing to do, and it requires bulldozers and lawn mowers and sprinklers to do the water. You can't do it by just talking. To create those playing fields, you have to get out there and water the grass and flatten the pitch, and then give people a chance to go run into the nets and hammer a ball over and over again.
If the sports journalist Graham Joffe is anything to go by, pretty much across all sports, the reason why nothing starts at the bottom is because the money that's there doesn't get to the bottom. It goes into deep pockets.
Imagine had South Africa not fallen into the trap of racial quotas and the like, and that been seen as an inadequate avenue to transformation. Imagine what might have taken its place. The real hard, long slog of actually investing in poor communities to try and uplift them. And in all those, what might have been those efforts were short-circuited into public relations stunts and virtue signaling. And, hopefully, I mean, if you want a silver lining, consequences such as this, such as Eskom, such as what's happening in the DA, might be things we need to move through in order to win more support from policymakers and the like for the arguments that if you want to do real empowerment and transformation, you've got to do it properly at scale and without recourse to racial targets and quotas.
Good. Yeah, it does feel a little bit like we are, the emperor has been walking around with no clothes for many years, and we've been able to endure it. And when the little child in South Africa says, hey, but he's naked, you get hit on the head, don't say that, you're being mean, you're being rude, you're being racist, you're being this, you're being that. But the emperor has broken enough things and has started to take enough things from enough people that it seems like we stand a chance of getting together and piercing the sort of silence and saying enough's enough.
Well, at least we're not Afghanistan.
Yeah, we're not Afghanistan. No.
Just.
We did beat them. Very glad to see that we won a game of cricket at the World Cup. And on that very happy note, thank you for joining us today. Please check out thedailyfriend.co.za, where you will see the writing of all three of my esteemed colleagues here and those who didn't join us today on the news of today in South Africa and abroad. Have a good one, and aluta.